Obsession lacks a single scene that would fit a conventional horror trailer. No jump scares, no creature reveals, and no dark hallways with lurking threats. Even the film's most unsettling 10-minute stretch consists merely of a man on hold with customer service and a couple arguing at a party. Yet, it grossed $443 million on a budget of $750,000, outperforming nearly every studio horror movie that relies on the genre's standard tropes. While most horror films require a ghost, a killer, or a legacy name to instill fear, Obsession abandoned all three and still built a more impactful experience. This film serves as proof that the genre's traditional toolkit is not the essential component of effective horror. I am not typically a fan of horror. Most genre entries follow a predictable pattern. A figure crawls out of the shadows, a jump scare arrives precisely as the score dictates, and the movie is forgotten by the following weekend. It is often the same skeleton wearing a different mask. However, Substance and Weapons managed to bypass these clichés, remaining memorable long after the credits rolled. And then Obsession showed up, made by a guy I recognized from YouTube's sketch videos, and I expected a novelty, a curiosity to watch once and move on from. That's usually how creator-made films go for me. Charming, a little rough, worth the runtime once out of curiosity. I could not move on from it. I sat through the entire runtime leaning forward, not out of boredom, but out of disbelief at how engaging the narrative remained. It took time to understand why a film centered on a magical willow and a simple crush felt more intrusive than any monster movie. It meticulously built scene after scene, allowing a benign premise to curdle into something truly haunting. Bear works at a music store with his three closest friends, Nikki, Ian, and Sarah. He's spent years in love with Nikki, and has never said so out loud. He wishes on a supernatural item called the One Wish Willow, purchased on a whim from a crystal shop, choosing it over the conversation he's too afraid to have. He wants her to love him more than anyone else in the world. The wish works exactly as asked, and the rest of the film is what that actually cost the four people in this friend group. By the time the wish gets made, the film has already spent real time letting you like these four people together before it starts taking them apart one at a time. While the premise sounds modest, Obsession treats it as a contract enforced exactly as written. This literalism is the true source of the film's horror. There's a horror structure that goes back over a century, built around a cursed object granting a wish that ruins the person who made it. W. Jacobs wrote the blueprint in 1902 with the monkey's paw, and it's the same shape The Simpsons parodied with its own monkey's paw sketch in Treehouse of Horror. Obsession borrows that shape, and then breaks the one rule every version of it depends on. In the old version, the cursed object is the villain. It grants the wish maliciously, twists the wording, punishes the wisher for wanting something. The One Wish Willow doesn't behave that way. It gives Bear precisely what he asked for. Nikki loving him more than anyone else in the world. Exactly as requested, no fine print, no trick clause hiding in the wording. The curse here comes entirely from what Bear was willing to ask for in the first place. Once the wish takes hold, the film shifts into a different structure, the one horror usually saves for haunted houses. Every haunted house story needs three things: a threat that won't stop, a place the victim can't leave, and a mistake that let the threat in. Obsession keeps the three-part shape and rebuilds each piece from something human. The threat is Nikki, stripped of the ability to say no. The place is the relationship itself, because as long as the wish holds, her whole identity orbits him with no door out. Most monster in the house stories build their sin from arrogance, someone trespassing on ground they were warned to avoid. Obsession swaps that out for something smaller and far more common, a person too afraid of rejection to just ask the question, choosing certainty over honesty, because honesty comes with the risk of losing. The mistake is Bear's refusal to risk one honest conversation, dressed up as an act of love. Strip the ghost out of a haunted house story, and there's nothing left to blame but the person who invited it in. That's what makes the next hour of this movie so hard to sit through. Just a man in a room with a woman he engineered into loving him, watching himself get exactly what he wanted. The film's own geography backs this up. Almost the entire runtime plays out across a handful of small Burbank locations: the music store, a pizza place, a bar, the crystal shop, and mostly Bear's house. A contained cast of four friends moving through a contained map. That tightness usually exists in horror to trap a group with an external threat they can't outrun. Here, it traps them with each other, and the smallness of the world only makes it more obvious there was never anywhere for Nikki to actually go. A malicious cursed object gives a film an easy villain to point at. The monkey's paw needs its supernatural trickster, because if the object itself weren't scheming, the story would have nowhere to put the blame except on the person holding it. Obsession removes that safety valve on purpose. With nothing external doing the corrupting, every ounce of blame stays exactly where it started, on Bear, the moment he decided a stranger's magic item was a fair substitute for a difficult conversation. The small cast raises the cost of that decision too. 4 friends, 1 store, 1 house. When a horror film gives you 15 background characters, a death barely registers before the plot moves past it. Obsession gives you 4 people, and lets you watch every one of them for most of 2 hours before the wish starts taking them apart, which means there's no stranger in this story anyone can afford to lose. None of this works the way it does by accident either. The camera is doing deliberate, patient work to make you feel trapped in that relationship right alongside her, and it does it almost entirely without raising its voice. The genre Obsession is actually in conversation with is the Nice Guy movie, the shape of story that spent 2 decades training audiences to root for the quiet, awkward guy who loves from a distance and eventually gets the girl as a reward for holding out long enough. That structure builds a rooting resume, traits designed purely to make an audience side with a character before he's earned anything. Films built on that shape usually end at the moment Bear reaches here. The guy finally says the thing, the girl chooses him, credits roll before anyone has to ask what happens the next morning. Ending there lets an audience believe persistence earned something fair. Obsession picks up the story exactly where those films always cut away, and every uncomfortable minute that follows exists, because showing what persistence actually costs the other person is the one thing the genre spent 20 years refusing to do. Nikki says something early on that the rest of the film is built around. Love is real, romance isn't. What Bear actually wants is proof he's worth choosing, evidence he's not as forgettable as he feels. And Nikki is just the shape that proof happens to take. That's limerence, falling for an idealized version of someone that has replaced the actual person you're looking at. Once the wish takes hold, Nikki starts performing exactly that idealized version. The fantasy girlfriend certain corners of the internet already market as the goal. Endlessly devoted, hypersexual, without opinions of her own. Obsession just shows you what actually delivering that fantasy would cost a real person. Bear gets more than one real chance to just say the truth out loud, and the film shoots each one like a confession scene it refuses to let him have. A bar, alone, with nobody watching. A car, enclosed and quiet. Her looking at him and not the road. The night she asks him directly if he likes her.
Do you like me?
Point blank, handing him the opening he claims to want. Every time he changes the subject. The film keeps giving him the exit, which makes every refusal a choice. The restaurant exchange, where Nikki asks why her love for him even matters, and Bear tells her flatly that it doesn't, is the whole film in 2 lines. It gets worse from there. When the real Nikki claws through long enough to beg him to kill her,
Kill me, please.
He refuses. And a woman preferring death to him registers in his head as an insult. On the surface, he's still the same shy guy from the music store. Underneath that, the shyness was always the cover story. If you've ever watched a movie reward the persistent, awkward guy and felt something sour under the part of you still rooting for him, that feeling has a name. Obsession is the first mainstream horror film willing to point straight at it and let the discomfort sit there, uncut by a kiss at the end. Persistence without consent is pressure wearing better lighting. And the film spends its back half making you sit in exactly how that feels from the other side of it. The film pushes past entitlement into something closer to true horror once the wish fully takes hold. There's a moment in Get Out where the lead realizes the people around him have been fully conscious and complicit the entire time. And the film's word for the state its victims get trapped in is the sunken place, aware inside your own body while something else drives it. Obsession builds the same mechanic without ever naming it. The real Nikki is awake for the entire film, feeling every scene her body is forced through, including the murders of Sarah and Ian, her 2 closest friends, carried out by hands she can't stop moving. The film doesn't cut away from her face to spare you what her hands are doing in that scene. It holds there, because she's still behind her own eyes the whole time, screaming at a body that won't listen to her anymore. Every one of her lucid moments, the bedroom, the phone call, the backward walk, happens in front of exactly one witness. That's the whole reason Bear gets to keep lying to himself. Nobody else has enough evidence to force the truth on him, so he never has to face it unless he chooses to. The camera makes sure you don't get to look away from any of it, the way he does. Real quick, if any of this is naming something you already felt but never had the words for, that's the entire job of this channel. A like or a subscribe genuinely helps put it in front of someone else who felt the same thing. Most horror hides its threat in shadow. Obsession does the opposite. Scenes are lit flatly and evenly. Even the crystal shop where Bear buys the willow, a location that would get thick fog and half-lighting in almost any other version of this story. The camera holds still on a locked tripod with an unusual amount of headroom above every character's head, a wall of empty space sitting over them in shot after shot. That space works as an invitation, training your eyes to keep checking it because the film has taught you something will eventually fill it. Nothing needs to actually appear there. The waiting does the work, which is a harder trick to pull off than a jump scare, and a far more effective one across a full runtime. That same headroom trick shows up again once Nikki starts deteriorating, the frame around her getting a little more empty each time, like the film is deliberately making room for whatever she's turning into before it actually arrives. Barker has described this exact instinct in his own words, using his grandmother as the example. She never had to jump out at anyone to be unsettling. She just said things that made you uncomfortable, and then let you sit there next to her while it lingered. That's the entire camera strategy of this movie compressed into one sentence, and it came from the director describing his own family, not a film school lecture. Interiors, especially the music store, get pushed into warm yellow with the contrast cranked way up, the same color choice most films use for comfort, soured into something that feels sickly the longer you sit in it. It's a small choice, and it does more to unsettle you across 2 hours than a single well-placed scare could manage in one moment. There's a physical detail that shows up as the wish deteriorates Nikki further into the film. In certain scenes, she starts walking backward, a reverse gait that reads as wrong before your brain can articulate why. It's a cheap trick to describe and a genuinely unsettling one to watch, the kind of choice that costs nothing to film and does more work than a dozen jump scares stacked together. Barker edited the film himself, which meant he controlled pacing at every single stage, start to finish. He builds in patient, lingering cuts, holding on reactions a beat or two past where a faster edit would move on, and that rhythm is what makes the film feel like it's trapping you in the room with these people. The film is also almost entirely practical. No CGI monster, barely any digital effects at all, just in-camera speed ramping and real makeup work for the violence when it finally arrives. That matters because the horror in this film was never going to come from something obviously fake looking real. It comes from something real looking exactly like what it is, which is why the gore, when it shows up, reads as a genuine rupture in the world. It doesn't announce itself with a big reveal, it just sits there in frame, ugly and undeniable, the way anything real actually looks up close. Barker built his career writing sketch comedy before this, and sketch comedy runs on the same muscle horror does.
Texting me back.
I'm sure he's fine, you piece of shit.
Exact timing, holding a beat past where it's comfortable, knowing precisely when to let an audience off the hook and when to keep them there. He just pointed that same muscle at dread. Something I found reading about the production. Barker structures every escalation with a causality rule borrowed from South Park's writer's room, where each beat has to connect to the next with this, but then, therefore, never two unconnected events sitting side by side. Nikki tells Bear she's quitting the store. That removes his only excuse to be near her. He panics and uses the willow that same night. Later, once the wish starts to visibly deteriorate her, Bear discovers the willow's number on the packaging he'd thrown away weeks earlier, which is the only reason the customer service call exists at all. Every escalation in this film earns itself. Nothing arrives because the plot needed a scary thing to happen next. It arrives because the choice before it made it inevitable. Screenwriters usually treat one script page as roughly 1 minute of screen time. Barker writes denser than that on purpose, packing scenes with dialogue and then stretching them out further during filming, letting silences and reaction shots run long after the words stop. That choice is exactly why scenes that could read as simple conversation on the page land as something closer to an interrogation on screen. Bear's cat dies from an accidental pill overdose in the opening act, the kind of scene almost every screenwriting guide calls a save the cat beat, built purely to make an audience like the lead before anything else happens. On the surface, it works. You feel for a lonely guy who just lost his only companion. Then look at his actual line over the body. He asks the dead cat how it got into the pills, shifting blame onto an animal for his own carelessness before the scene is even over. That's the whole character delivered in one sentence, and the plot hasn't even started yet. The party scene where Bear and the wish-corrupted Nikki debut as a couple in front of their friends builds its horror entirely out of secondhand embarrassment, the kind of discomfort a sketch comedy writer knows how to engineer on purpose. The party's dare game turns into the sharpest demonstration in the whole film of performed feeling next to real feeling. Bear's dare lands him the kiss with Sarah, and Wish Nikki shoves her way into it instead, jealous of a woman who's done nothing wrong. Love with nothing real underneath it, staged for friends who have no idea they're watching a performance. Remainder recites a violent, incestuous retelling of Hansel and Gretel to the room right after, written by Barker's own father as a script consultant. What makes it work is what the story reveals underneath it. Earlier in the film, the real Nikki told Bear she saw him as basically a brother. The fairy tale becomes the trapped, real Nikki finding the only voice left to her, warning the room that whatever this relationship has become, it was never supposed to look like this. It's Ian's voice, not Bear's, that finally breaks the real Nikki back to the surface.
Nikki, are you okay?
Because the two of them have their own history, an old closeness the wish can't fully paper over. It takes someone who actually knew her before to shake something real loose, if only for the few seconds it takes her to scream, "It's not me," before the wish reasserts control. Everyone at the party reads the outburst differently. Jealousy, a power play against Sarah, A breakdown nobody wants to name out loud? Only Bear knows the real answer, and he still says nothing. Remarkably, this effectiveness did not require a large budget. Barker filmed the entire project in 20 days for $750,000, roughly a tenth of the cost of a modest studio horror film. Car scenes were faked using LCD screens outside the windows of a parked vehicle. Michael Johnston, who plays Bear, even filmed early scenes without his contact lenses, resulting in a genuine look of disorientation. These techniques demonstrate that true unease comes from patience and deliberate framing, rather than financial investment. The single best scene in the film doesn't involve Nicky at all. Desperate to undo what he's done, Bear calls the customer service number printed on the Willow's packaging, and gets an agent who sounds bored out of her mind.
Put in a request.
Guessing your intention, man.
What the hell?
Voiced by Barker himself, recorded alone in his bedroom during editing. The scene works because it treats the horror like a policy problem, flat and procedural, the exact tone a phone company uses to deny you a refund on something you already know isn't coming back. The representative delivers the most devastating line in the film with zero weight behind it. Just because Bear chose this for Nicky doesn't make it any less real. That flatness is exactly why it works. Then he can suddenly hear the real Nicky screaming through the phone, somewhere behind whatever is currently wearing her voice. And the film never bothers explaining how a customer service line has access to a trapped woman's consciousness. It doesn't need to. The representative is a mirror in that scene, built entirely to strip away every excuse Bear has been making for himself and hand it back to him as the sound of a person he's actively torturing. Zach Kreger, who made Weapons, the other film that actually got through to me this year, has said in interviews that he barely gets scared watching movies anymore, and that Obsession is the one that did it. Both films get their dread from watching people behave in ways that are uncomfortably recognizable, no supernatural threat required. When the guy who made the other movie that broke through my own horror fatigue points at this one and says the same thing happened to him, that's two people who make a living being hard to scare, agreeing on exactly what worked. Barker actually shot a different ending first. In that version, Bear shoots himself in front of Nicky with a practical gunshot effect and a full blood splatter, ending things with one clean, violent image, and Nicky survives the moment traumatized, but simply alive. Barker cut it. The version that made the final film is worse, on purpose. And it's worse because it refuses to let Bear die a clean death, or Nicky walk away from a clean tragedy. The blunt version would have made Bear's death feel like closure. The version we got keeps that closure just out of reach. One more thing that happens to Nicky without her ever getting to choose it. Bear can't go through with the gun, so he swallows his grandmother's pills instead, panicking immediately, the first honest instinct towards self-preservation he's shown since the wish began. Even dying, apparently, is something he wants on his own terms. Then, Nicky makes the final wish herself, and the calm that replaces his panic is the same hollow calm he spent the whole film building into her. He spends his last minutes holding her instead. For the first time in the entire film, Bear experiences a taste of what he did to Nicky. His own will taken from him without permission, right at the very end of his life. It reads like the film handing him one final, fitting punishment, disguised as a tender goodbye scene. Nicky's final wish is also the story's cleanest piece of symmetry. She makes the same request Bear made in the opening act, and it kills the person who taught her that this was how you get what you want from someone. Bear's death breaks the wish, and hands the real Nicky back her body, her tears switching in an instant from performed devotion to something genuinely wrecked. What she actually gets back is the wreckage, 2 dead friends, blood evidence tying her to both deaths, and the only witness who could explain any of it lying dead on the floor beside her. A magic willow doesn't hold up as a legal defense, and nobody investigating this scene is going to write down the truth of what actually happened here. Bear's death is the last selfish thing he does in the entire film, escaping every consequence and leaving Nicky to carry all of it alone for the rest of whatever life she has left. That's the whole difference between this and every other horror movie that came out around it. Those needed something supernatural to explain the damage. This one just needed people making bad decisions in rooms with the lights on. If breaking the rules is what made Obsession work, my favorite movie from the first half of this year did the same thing to an entire summer of blockbusters, built around nothing but a science teacher and a dying son. That's the video linked right here.